You're listening to Inside Eyes, and I'm your host, Laura Mae Northrup. Welcome back, everyone. Thank you for joining me. I am your host, Laura Mae Northrup. We are on episode 7 of season 2. If you are starting this series for the first time, please note that this series is roughly designed to be listened to as a sequential series, as well as individual episodes. There might be important topics covered in one episode and then expanded on in another. Essentially, a lot can be gathered by listening to the entire series in order. I encourage you to start with the first episode in this season entitled Welcome Magic. And please note, although at the time of this recording, I am a licensed psychotherapist in the state of California in the United States, this podcast is not therapy, it is not a substitute for therapy, and it is not advice attuned to your specific needs. So please, seek advice from a trained, competent practitioner about your specific situation to keep you as safe as possible before embarking on any healing with psychedelics or entheogens. I offer these insights in the spirit of harm reduction and education. And remember that there is sensitive content in these episodes that is not suitable for children. And before I get into today's topic, I want to share that in the time I was not releasing episodes, I wrote and published a book. My book is called Radical Healership: How to Build a Values-Driven Healing Practice in a Profit-Driven World. Part memoir and part politicized self-help. In a nutshell, it's a self-help book for the helpers. It's for healing practitioners of all kinds, and it tackles spiritual, psychological, and political issues around what it means for us to survive in capitalism and offer healing work with integrity. I am so delighted to be able to offer this piece of writing to you all. Seriously, I poured my heart, soul, tears, and years of my life into this book. I'm proud to say it's already sold out of its first printing, and people seem to find it super helpful. So if you like what you hear on my show, trust me, the same level of heart and intention is waiting for you in that book. If you're considering becoming a healing practitioner, or you already are one, but you want to rethink how you walk your path, you can order it anywhere books are sold. Again, it's called Radical Healership: How to Build a Values-Driven Healing Practice in a Profit-Driven World. And, of course, I want to encourage you to buy it from your local independent bookstore. And if you're a person who learns well by listening, there is an audiobook, and it's read by yours truly. Okay, now, for today's episode, the divine is unbreakable. Sexual trauma and other abusive boundary violations challenge us around what is breakable. Living under the ongoing oppression of racial capitalism, white supremacy, and Christian supremacy challenges us around what is breakable. Witnessing or participating in violence against others, against the body of the earth, challenges us around what is breakable. And as I have highlighted in past episodes, we cannot separate these experiences. Sexual violence exists at the intersection of multiple forms of oppression, and it is born from the same heinous systems of belief. Experiencing abuse and violence delivers us to a new world, one where humans are capable of horrific behaviors, where the natural boundary around one's body is cast off into a void of nothingness in a moment. Prior to one's first encounter of violence, the world has some solidity to it. And yes, it may not feel entirely safe. There may be pre-existing harms one has endured. But severe violence, and especially sexual violence, initiates us into another level of the world falling apart in a terrifyingly embodied way. Walls are walls, and the floor is the floor. But in an instant, the invisible container that we only know we miss once it is gone is shattered. And for this reason, survivors of violence often feel that nothing is safe. Any person could suddenly reveal their capacity to harm. Any situation could transform, because they know. They know that the possibility of a shadow world exists alongside all moments. And once you know that, you can never unknow it. Any person could be a sweet soul, generously sharing life with you. And any person could be harmful. And sometimes that is the same person, both capable of acts of love and acts of harm. And this is an excruciating reality to live in, to know full stop that violence is always possible, that the body is always vulnerable. And by extension, many trauma survivors find themselves flooded and overwhelmed by larger societal issues such as the fragility of peace and the threat or actuality of war, the awareness that capitalism will implode, that the climate crisis is in fact a crisis. It can feel like the ground is falling out beneath you, or there is no adult in the room to protect you or attend to painful moments. And at times, that may be the case. The soul needs to find something that cannot be destroyed, something that can withstand hate, violence, ignorance, and neglect. Because without that, there is no hope. All can be lost. The power of destruction is profound. What takes years to create can be demolished in seconds. Many survivors hypervigilantly and at times unconsciously seek the answer. What is unbreakable? It could be the fantasy that a person, maybe someone you love, will never leave you, or falsely believing that a job or career will always make you feel powerful. You may find a spiritual community that you may wish will never sway to corruption. It could even be grounding yourself in a belief, for example, that everything will always work out in the end as long as you are good. And it might even be in the way you view yourself, attempting to help others beyond the limits of your capacity, trying to meet impossible standards, thereby demonstrating to yourself that perfect, impeccable care, which never falters, is somehow humanly possible. It could even look like hurting yourself intentionally, to feel that the unbreakable thing is your own ability to endure pain, or your ability to have ultimate power over your body and life. But each of these disappoints, because despite all the mental and material gymnastics we enact trying to find that which is unbreakable in people, the material world around us, and ourselves, all of this has an end. I want to talk about what is truly unbreakable. It goes by many names throughout time and throughout cultures. It is the numinous, the great mystery, the Tao, the Creator, Allah, God, Hashem, Goddess, the eternal, the wild and unending existence of life. It is the unnameable thing that is the nature of reality and the way of existence, the sprout that breaks through thawing earth in spring, the shapelessness of water, collecting itself into a crushing wave, the stone expressing its infinite forms as wind, rain, and gravity sculpted over millennia, the first breath as a newborn enters this plane, and the last breath as all of us exit it, the force that animates the world, the infinite and endless adamantine power of love. It is what I often call the divine. I once met this indescribable thing in a journey. It feels inadequate and small to even give it a name, and in some traditions one would not, for it is misguided to try and name or define the ineffable. But here I am in my humble human attempts to tell this story. The experience was so powerful, I could feel that the portal opening was in ways unbearable to my human form. As soon as our conversation began, I could sense its impending end. Just as staring at the sun permanently wounds the eyes, it was as if nothing that powerful could be encountered head on. I asked into the darkness, "Who are you? What are you?" And in response, I heard, "You cannot understand who or what I am, because you do not understand that time never started, and it never ends. That space never started, and never ends. And that life never started, and never ends. The infinite, while it is a concept that I understand cognitively, it is not something that I can have a continued embodied experience of in this human form. Yes, for a moment, maybe even a long moment, I can feel into a sense of connection to all things, all life, to oneness. But then I get hungry. Then I get tired. Then I have a birthday. The ego does ego things. Another year passes. I see gray hairs and creases that no longer bounce back after a smile, preferring to rest in the familiar shapes my face makes. As humans in bodies, we reside in the world of the finite quite often. It is a spiritual practice to explore what is infinite, despite the impermanent landscape of our own egos and physical forms. When I say the divine is unbreakable, or that love is unbreakable, and that this is a balm to the traumatized soul, I don't mean that your partner won't leave you, that you will never be laid off from a job, or that you will no longer be vulnerable to future violence. I don't mean that it all turns out in the end and happiness prevails. I don't mean you will never be triggered again, or even that this will be your go-to resource when you are triggered. I mean that in the infinite realm of the divine, truth does prevail. Because there are elements in this world that cannot be broken. And I offer this notion to you because I think this is part of why entheogens and psychedelics are so healing to sexual trauma survivors. To take a journey into direct connection with the divine, to feel it through the vessel of your own body, to know that a fundamental solid truth much larger than ourselves exists, that is world restoring and life defining. That is hitting the ground. That is the adult in the room. That is the essential breath that fills the lungs and eases the fear of drowning. To know it is a practice. It might require a daily touching in, setting down the devices, closing your eyes, and feeling the breath that tells you you are alive. The breath that flows in and out of you as it did all of your human ancestors. For every moment you forget it, there is an opportunity to remember it. Within the larger sense of the unbreakable divine, there are a few specific spiritual comforts I want to speak to you about. An aspect of facing tragedy is that it can force us to spin in pain. How can such horror be real? How can some people commit such terrifyingly cruel acts toward fellow human beings? And in a way, all the injustices flood in. How can we perpetuate any harms to others, to the precious earth we walk upon, to the waters in the oceans, to all the sacred creatures among us? For all the despair that life can bring, the grief, the sense that there is no hope or justice, here are some additional spiritual comforts, and I offer these to you in a usable, practical way. This is not simply a fantastical way of talking about life. I mean to offer these for you when you are in the worst of it, when you feel hopelessness or despair. So here we go. For every horror, there is mercy. All things come to an end. Sometimes death is even a mercy. It can be hard to see mercy for what it is in difficult moments. We can look at it and think that it too is a tragedy. At the end of a struggle with cancer, we might say it was a tragedy that a person has died. In a terrible work environment, we might say that it is unfair that someone was fired. When someone in an unfulfilling relationship chooses to end it, we may say they gave up, they weren't willing to do the work. But in all these situations, there is some aspect of mercy at play. Mercy doesn't mean that all is well. It means that one source of pain has come to an end. It is likely in any situation there are other pains and wounds that were not resolved by the mercy. But that brings me to the next spiritual comfort. For every wound, there is healing. It may take years, and it may take generations. But for every wound, there is the possibility to heal. Healing doesn't mean that we make things the way they once were. Some things cannot be restored. Instead, they may be repaired, but repair still acknowledges and allows for what came before us. Healing means that we integrate the reality of tragedy into how we know and understand the world. So there will never be a world where whatever abuse or violence you and others around you and those that came before you experienced did not happen. But there will be a world where the wisdom, compassion, and generosity that can emerge from healing will come. Again, it may not be in your lifetime, though I hope you can find that path and embrace it in every way possible while you are alive. But even if healing doesn't happen in your lifetime, it is a force in the galaxies that is so great. It will always exist as long as the great mystery of life exists. And when healing doesn't happen, for every pain, there is the spiritual gift of distraction. In a sense, this is another form of mercy. Often in wellness culture, we look down on checking out or coping. You should be living your best life and be fully present. Distraction, dissociation, and coping are powerful tools, and frankly, it is okay to employ them. We do need to know what we are doing so we can understand what tool we are using, but that doesn't mean you shouldn't use it. Distraction, in the way I am using this term, is not healing. It is not transforming. It is a temporary departure from pain. Becoming present in our lives is a lifetime of work. Surviving sexual trauma is excruciating, and one of the greatest comforts is the fact that you can dissociate, check out, push the pain away, and try to forget about it. Truly, that is a spiritual blessing. Can you imagine if human beings were constructed in such a way that our nervous systems could not dissociate? that our minds could not be distracted. We would die from the pain. This is a gift to be able to survive. Of course, sometimes when we distract, dissociate, or cope, it hurts other people. Your kids need your presence. Your partners need your presence. Your community needs your presence. This earth needs your presence. Dissociation becomes a problem when it is chronic, and it can lead to offloading your own pain onto others, and thereby continuing the cycle of abuse. For example, distraction can also become neglect of yourself or others. What I am suggesting is very complex. I'm not encouraging harm, and I always encourage you to heal. In fact, what I encourage more so is to use distraction as a holdover until you have the capacity to heal. What a blessing to know that in the worst moments, if you need it, you can have this. It isn't a replacement for healing, but it is a tool to survive until you can make it there. And finally, as I talked about in episode 3 of this series, expression is a spiritual gift too. You don't actually have to sit in stuckness. You can wail, pound the earth, and scream to your heart's content. You can shake and move and let whatever pain is inside of you flow through you. You can sing and cry. What a profound blessing to have a body that can express. Truly a gift. So in the worst moments of despair, outside of expanded state work, I offer you a reminder of these spiritual comforts: mercy, healing, distraction, and expression. These are divine, unbreakable forces of our world. One of them may not be available to you in any given moment, but one of the others will be. Now I want to speak for a moment about this from the lens of doing medicine work, because these are essential spiritual gifts in that realm too. Many survivors have very hard, sometimes even excruciating journeys. In the most uncomfortable moments, you may find yourself swearing you will never do another healing journey and humbly praying for it to end. Regarding mercy, the journey will end. Yes, the journey never ends, but the effects of the substances will, and this is helpful to be aware of, because if you are experiencing a very difficult journey, perhaps one you might not know if you can handle, focusing on the mercy, the fact that it will end, is a resource you can lean on. As well, a bad journey, or a bad trip, as they say, may be the mercy of finally confronting a painful pattern. Despite being a spiritual gift, mercy is not always comfortable. Regarding healing, this is what is happening most of the time in a healing journey, and staying focused on that can help you with the very hard journeys. To remember that your body knows how to heal, that most of the discomfort comes from rejecting its wisdom and impulses. If you are new to using a particular medicine, you may need to build a relationship to that medicine and feel some initial healing in order to lean into this. Not having an embodied experience of what you will receive from the experience can sometimes make it hard to trust that healing is what is happening. I often say that with severe trauma, one of the hardest things to trust is that things may get better. Often survivors don't want to dredge up that past, don't want to go into the hard stuff, because doing so is painful. And if you are early in your journey of healing, you may struggle to do this because you are aiming for a life that you don't yet have an idea of what it might feel like to live it. It is truly a leap of faith. But once you do have even the tiniest bit of healing under your belt, let that be a gateway into accessing this spiritual gift, that all things transform and change, and healing is possible. Again, you may need to ground into a much larger sense of time and personhood. The level of healing you desire may or may not be completely possible in your lifetime, in your individual experience, but expanding into a larger sense of oneself, to include that you may be contributing to a healing that expands out to generations, and that someday, in some way, healing is possible. Regarding distraction, this is a last resort. If a journey is too hard, if something is more than you bargained for, to some degree, you cannot get off the ride. But you can also distract yourself from pain with many things in order to get out of the journey, should you want to press the eject button. And that could mean that you talk to someone, or call a friend, or think about your pet, or just breathe and attempt to push away whatever is happening in the moment. I am not encouraging you to do this as a general practice in working with medicines, because it is not healing. What I am saying is that if you feel you actually cannot do what you set out to do, this is a tool you might try. You can look at a clock and count the minutes down. You can focus on something happening outside of you. In a sense, you can attempt to pivot out of a healing journey and into a fun or neutral one. Or if you have a guide, you might ask for help slowing the experience down. But again, this is not a healing act. This is more in line with, uh-oh, that was way too many mushrooms for this setting or for my current capacity, and I need to do whatever it takes to get away from what is happening. And finally, regarding expression, some entheogenic or psychedelic medicine traditions may encourage you to contain yourself, may encourage you to sit still, to be stronger than the impulses of the body. So to those traditions, I respectfully say, I'm offering a different wisdom, and we can exist alongside each other. But I am suggesting that you do not sit still, that you do not ignore bodily impulses, and that you do not master the experience through controlling it. The body is in the expanded state with you. It is alive, wise, and it is not separate from your mind. Just as you would allow your mind to have the thoughts and visions the medicine portal opens, I am suggesting you allow your body to be fully in the expanded state of consciousness as well, and let the spirit take you. Let the ego soften, and when the body says shake, you shake. When the body says wail and pound the earth in despair, you allow this so completely that you stop existing and allowing the experience. And rather, you are just doing it without thought, without the hesitation or decisions of the ego. That when the spirit says, feel all the wild sensations of your being and writhe with them, you cast off the conditioning that your body should not move in sensual, sexual, or erotic ways. You reject the narrative that you should not shake with rage or grab your belly in the agony of disgust. And you do exactly what your spirit instructs you to do. The only time I suggest sitting in complete stillness is when that is the instruction from your being and the medicine. It is not weak to express. It is surrendering to the wisdom of the wild mysteries that created us and gave us these gifts. If crying were wrong, why do tears so easily stream from our eyes? If laughing were to be inhibited, why does the mouth stretch wide and far, allowing the most joyous of sounds to emerge? If screaming out in anger were not right, why does the body create such a righteous sound? Some final thoughts I want to share today around spirituality and psychedelics are related to what we deem spiritual work, healing work, and recreational psychedelic use. In the US, the war on drugs has resulted in a negative public view of psychedelics. Non-factual narratives inflating the risks associated with their use abound. They are primarily illegal and what the US government calls Schedule I substances. From the Drug Enforcement Administration's website, a Schedule I substance is defined as, quote, drugs, substances, or chemicals with no currently accepted medical use and a high potential for abuse, end quote. Some examples of entheogens and psychedelics that are categorized under Schedule I are LSD, MDMA, peyote, and psilocybin. As advocates for the healing use of psychedelics attempt to change public opinion, many promote the idea that psychedelic therapy is the only skillful use of these substances. That can include discouraging recreational use or implying that without a professional trained in an academic institution or evidence-based medical context, healing either cannot happen or poses more risk to the user. Even though there are thousands of years of safe use in traditional contexts, as well as the massive data set that underground recreational use offers, some drug companies want us to believe that they must create a proprietary, patented type of medicine for it to be safer for public use. This is simply not true. Patented medicines are for people to control profit, not to make you safer. People use psychedelics and entheogens in many contexts, find healing, and do it safely. This is not to say there are not risks in using these substances, because there definitely are. But rather, aside from more recently synthesized or lesser explored psychedelics, we know what the risks are because, as previously mentioned, we have been using psychedelics and entheogens for thousands of years, or in the case of synthetic psychedelics, en masse for decades. The attempt to distance the psychedelic therapy context from spiritual and recreational contexts results in misinformation and a degradation of valid forms of use. In essence, rather than firmly stating the truth about risk and offering education, the narrative becomes recreational use and non-medical use is unsafe, not healing, or an abuse of the substance. But medical use by academically trained professionals is safe, healing, and not a misuse of the substance. The kind of healing I am speaking about in this episode and in this entire series does not agree with this thinking. While you might choose to do a journey with a professional trained in an evidence-based medical context, that is not required for everyone to find healing. Profound healing can come from an entirely spiritual or ceremonial context, and it is naively misguided to imply that recreational contexts are not spiritual or are not healing. It is also not factual that working in an evidence-based medical context is always safe. There are plenty of instances of psychedelic medicine in evidence-based medical contexts where the experience is traumatic, oppressive, or significantly harming in other ways. This work has risks in all contexts, and we cannot simply make blanket statements that one context is always safer than another. It is of critical importance that we assess for danger and act in protective ways in all environments. Recreational is defined as an activity done for enjoyment when one is not working, as well as drug use that is not for medical benefit. Only a society with a profoundly unwell lens on spiritual health and healing would consider enjoyment entirely separate from personal growth, or would define enjoyment in opposition to medical benefit. Partying can be a spiritual, healing, and medically beneficial activity because deep embodied joy is a spiritual, healing, and medically beneficial activity. With all that said, this series is focused on healing sexual trauma and supporting you to create the most effective and safe environment for that specific intention. So, if that is your expressed goal, I would not recommend intentionally attempting to heal this particular type of trauma in a recreational context. Some survivors also report that when taking a psychedelic or entheogen in a recreational context with the goal of having fun, they end up facing their trauma the entire time without adequate support. So even if you are not aiming to work on your trauma, please be aware that it can come up in a recreational context, and if you are a trauma survivor, you may want to be extra cautious about doing a consciousness-expanding substance in a recreational context. At the end of the day, whatever path you find yourself on, you can allow your use of expanded states to be a sacred and spiritually grounded act in every use context, whether you are in a therapy office, a ceremonial ritual, or dancing the night away. All right, we will leave it there for now. I wish you all some grace and courage wherever you are at in your life today. If you want to support the show, please rate it on whatever podcasting app you use and consider sharing this episode with people who may benefit. Thank you so much for supporting this work. I teach occasional classes, offer group and individual consultation to clinicians around the world, and I provide psychotherapy to people located in California. If you are curious about my offerings, you can find out more information and contact me via my website, lauramaynorthrup.com. And here is where I give out my social media handles, but I want to say a little something about social media. You only see what ends up being popular enough to come into your feed the days that you look at the app. An app that is controlled and censored by capitalist elites. If you want to ensure you hear about ways to work with me, learn from me, or get healing support, join my email list. I send very few emails, like maybe less than 5 a year. You can find it on my website, www.lauramaynorthrup.com, or there's a link in the show notes. And if you want to see memes and leave things up to social media fate, find me on Instagram. I'm at Laura May with an E Northrup. And don't forget, I have a new book out, Radical Healership. Check it out. Link in the show notes. Okay, until next time.